to go? All right. Our keynote speaker today for BSidesLV is Adam Shostack, and I'm a big fan of propaganda, and especially North Korean propaganda with the crazy origin stories that they create for their sort of cult of personality for leaders. So because I know that everyone here, one of the principal skills of being in InfoSec is being able to cut through bullshit. So what I've done is I've taken Adam's bio and I've strategically inserted some bullshit into it. So you can decide which is real and which isn't. Adam Shostack was born in northern Siberia, with the occasion of his birth accompanied by a volcanic eruption of such violent magnitude that it shattered windows across neighboring Finland and led the Soviet Union to claim the event as their largest nuclear test, known as the Shostack Bomba. Adam is a technologist, entrepreneur, author, game designer, and professional Komodo dragon wrestler. He's a member of the Black Hat Review Board and a principal program manager at Microsoft. His bio says he helped found the CVE and, provocatively, many other things. He's the author of Threat Modeling, Designing for Security, lead designer of Elevation of Privilege, the co-author of the New School of Information Security, and co-designer of Control-Alt-Hack. When flying, he never uses airplane mode. Instead, the airplane uses Adam Shostack mode. Please put your hands together and join me in welcoming the BSidesLV keynote speaker, Adam Shostack.
Thank you. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, and please put your phones into Adam Shostack mode. Today I'm excited to be here in Las Vegas and hear about all the O-Days and all the hacks and maybe even participate in a few of the shenanigans that go on here. And as I was thinking about all of that and thinking about what I wanted to say, I realized how much the enthusiasm we bring to what we do contrasts with the way in which we find ourselves burnt out. And I am having a fun and exciting thing here where my slides are not showing correctly, so I'm just going to restart this before I get into the details. There we go. There we go. Now it looks the way I was hoping it might even look. So the problem statement that I want to start from is really about burnout. And this is work that Jack Daniel and others have been doing for a long time. And they talk about the level of exhaustion, the level of cynicism, and the level of efficacy that we feel as security professionals. And say that the levels of efficacy are where we as security professionals distinguish ourselves from other high-stress professions. And efficacy, the ability to produce a desired or intended result, is really, to me, the heart of why we burn out. It's not the stress. It's not the put your weekend on hold while there's an emergency. It's the ongoing issues. And these issues lead to problem statements like this from Mike Rogers, the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, who says that there's those who have been hacked and those who have been hacked but don't know it yet. Closely related is this comment from Nicole Pearl-Roth, writing in the New York Times. And she said, security experts like to say that there are only two types of companies left in the US, those that have been hacked and those that don't know they've been hacked. And the reason I bring in this second variant is because I think she's absolutely right when she says we like to say this. We giggle and you laugh when we say there's only two types of companies. And I think about that, and I think about the problem of burnout. Because if we can't prevent our companies from getting hacked, and if we're lucky to know that they've been hacked, well, that seems to me to relate to low levels of efficacy and it relates closely to burnout. And so it's hard to defend our systems. We accept that it's hard to defend our systems. You've probably experienced management looking at you when you come and say, I'd like to go and deploy this or deploy that. Looking at you like you're asking for it to pour money into a black hole. Because they know that you're going to come back in 3 months with the next thing that you want to put money into. And once you've deployed these things, they still won't know whether or not they've been hacked. They still... Oops. So I want to present a model of the world. And this is just a model. As I say in the threat modeling book, all models are wrong and some models are useful. I hope that this is a useful kind of model, really as a way to think about the state of the world. And the state of the world is that companies invest to prevent attacks, they invest to detect attacks, and they invest to respond. And then there's training that goes on, and then attacks happen, and we may or may not notice them. So I want to talk a little bit about how we invest in these controls. The first way we invest in controls is, oh my god, APT. And we say we're going to do this because someone told us it will work. We also invest in controls because of standards and compliance. Somebody says you have to do this, whether that's PCI, whether that's FedRAMP, whatever the standard is, oftentimes the standards and compliance with those standards end up absorbing our entire budgets. It absorbs everything that management is willing to put in, because by the time you're done hitting that bar, it's no longer a min bar, it's where you must be. We also invest because someone tells us that this or that is a best practice. And this is running without my involvement or touching things, which is super exciting. So whoever's taking control of the RF device, could you please stop? Well, maybe it has, maybe it hasn't. So ODA, compliance, best practices, and we plug these things into frameworks such as prevent and detect and respond, or people, process, and technology. And without meaning any disrespect, if I were at, say, RSA or SANS or some other conference, I could probably present this with a straight face and no one would object. Maybe without the, oh my god, APT O-Day, but maybe with. But I think there are things missing, and I think there are important things missing. And the first thing that's missing is lessons learned of some form. The idea that after a problem happens, we go back and we try to learn something from that problem, and we try and make sure it doesn't happen again. More broadly, we're missing feedback loops. We're missing any ability to take knowledge that we learn in one incident and plug it into anything. And most of all, we're missing science. And I think the ability to test our hypotheses, to make statements that we believe are reasonable because we've subjected them to aggressive testing, is just not here in our profession. And this ties to the reasons that we're burnt out. And that brings me to the question of why are they missing? Brings me to the question of why are they missing? And a big part of the reason that they're missing is because we don't like to talk about what's gone wrong. We like to see no evil. We like to hear no evil. Well, that's not true. We love to hear evil and giggle and point fingers. It's not necessarily the best way to respond, but unfortunately, it seems to be a lot of the way that we respond. But most importantly, we like to speak no evil. We like to never own up to a problem which has occurred, because those well, I'll talk about the reasons we don't like to talk about that a little bit later. But we don't like to say, I experienced this issue, and here's what happened, and here's what we did about it. We really, really hate doing that. And we do a little bit of information sharing. Information sharing has been a buzzword at the policymaker level for 20 plus years, and it's working so well that it continues to be a buzzword at the policymaker level. Or maybe it's not working quite so well. And I like to contrast sharing with the idea of publication. And this is a little bit like the difference between open source and closed source. If you have an open source product, you can dig into it, you can understand how it works. If you have a closed source product, you have a different business model. I'm not going to say one is better than the other, but I will say that we can use it to illuminate our thinking about what we might do when we think about sharing information versus publishing information that's happened during incidents. And when I talk to people about these ideas, a lot of times they will tell me, publication is impossible, no one will ever stand for it, it just doesn't, it's not happening. But the truth is, publication actually happens today. We publish information about our security incidents. There's data breach notification laws which require it at times. There's FISMA, the Federal Information Security Management Act, which requires reporting to US CERT, and then they take that information and they publish it once a year, making it available to anyone who wants to see it. Florida, this hasn't gotten a lot of press, I'm not sure why, but Florida just enacted a new breach law. And under the new Florida data breach law, the Attorney General, after an incident, the Attorney General of the state of Florida can ask you for a copy of the forensic report and your data security policies. And if you'd like to think about where you want that not to go, I might suggest that an Attorney General might be high on your list. And without commenting on the wisdom of this law in any way, I will note that all of the lobbying, which organizations might have attempted to prevent this law from coming into effect, didn't work, and the law came into effect because the policymakers don't like the fact that there are two types of companies, those that know they've been hacked and those that haven't figured it out. They think that's a bad situation for society, and they're trying to do something about it. Whether they're doing something successfully, that's a question we can debate, ideally with adult beverages handy. There's the Verizon DBIR, which people often bring up, and I'm a fan of the DBIR, and they do their darndest to explain what it is they're seeing and how they're doing their analysis, and I have tremendous respect for them. But the truth is, no one else can replicate the work that they're doing. No one else has access to the data set to dig in and say, if I do this analysis, do I get to the same answers that they do? And the ability to replicate work is a tremendously important element of science, and it's an important element of why we need to move towards a publication model for incidents. Most of the publication which happens today, the details don't actually enable anyone to see what happened. For example, if you look to, the Target breach, we learned that millions of credit cards had been stolen, but only months later did we learn how the attackers got in because someone leaked a report somewhere. Target paid the price of talking about what happened, but they didn't pay the price to tell us why it happened so that we could learn from their pain. So publication happens today, and the quality of the analysis which comes out looks a lot like this. And I gave a previous version of this talk at Syracon, and Alex mocked me for using a pie chart. So this is not my pie chart. But this pie chart from the General Accounting Office's report is that analysis of federal incidents which we get today. And it says such things as malicious code, denial of service, scans, probed, and attempted access. My favorite, unauthorized access, whatever that happens to be. How does that relate to improper usage? And then a whole bunch of it remains under investigation. And I point this out not to cast stones or aspersions on the work they're doing. They're doing the work as best they can, and the people doing the work are good, smart people. But I believe that we can do better. The other thing that I take from this GAO report is that even when there is a law which requires government organizations to deploy certain security controls, the number of agencies which are 90 to 100% effective at configuration management and vulnerability management is the far left. It's 2 organizations are doing config management over 90 to 100% of their assets, and 4 are doing vuln scanning over 90 to 100%. Most are at less than 60% of their systems. And this is the case where we have these laws in place. And I bring this up not because I think this is a problem, but because I think this is an opportunity. And so I want to talk about an engineering approach that takes advantage of this. If we believe that controls vary across organizations, that compliance is a goal, not a reality, and that few organizations are 100% compliant, then we can actually start to use this as a basis for science. So, for example, if we have 8 organizations, cleverly labeled organizations 1 through 8, and we have 8 controls, which I picked out of a hat, ranging from user education to password policy or patch management, and we conveniently deploy them in different ways, then we can think about what we might learn from these different deployments. So we can believe, I hope we can agree, in fact, that controls should prevent incidents, or that controls should help us detect incidents. Because if they don't, why are we deploying them? And so I also believe that we should be able to agree that different types of controls should prevent different types of incidents. So for example, we might say that user education is unlikely to have any impact on 0-day vulnerabilities. It might change the rate at which people put USB sticks in their computers and are attacked by auto-run or Office macros. But compared to patch management, where we know that we can deploy a patch and deal with auto-run worms, we can deploy patches and deal with Office macros, we can deploy patches and deal with issues that have patches available for them, those are places where we believe strongly that these controls should have a measurable impact on the incidents. And so if we do this, and then pay attention to what happens, and these are our hypothetical incidents, we might be able to do science. So here we are seeing organization 1 has had some 0-day issues, no auto-run, no Office macros, people install software, people get tricked into doing things, and they have configuration issues. Similarly, organization 2 has some 0-day and some users getting tricked. And so this is obviously a constructed example, but the constructed example allows us to compare what controls are in place at an organization versus what sort of incidents are happening. And if we do this, then what we might learn is, for example, every organization that hasn't deployed EMIT, Microsoft's Enhanced Mitigation Experimentation Toolkit, thank you. Every organization that hasn't deployed it is hit by O-Day. See, here's the EMIT column. So not deploying it, you get hit. Deploying it, some people still get hit. We do see bypasses for that technology. We could see that every organization without patch management, this bottom half, 5 through 7, is hit by auto-run worms. None of the ones with patch management are impacted. And so we can say that appears to be an effective control. We can test the hypothesis which we formulated by looking at the incidents which occur. And we can use that to develop a new model of the world, or a modified model of the world, in which these incidents are getting reported to some place that is able to do analysis, that can look at what's happening and say, here's what we can learn from what actually occurred in the world. And if we can do that analysis based on reports from organizations with different controls, we can start to assess which controls really work, and then we can change the advice that we give. And whether that advice comes in the form of PCI or FedRAMP or ISO 27001 or industry best practice, which no CIO would possibly violate. I was talking to someone earlier who mentioned that their customers would love to replace their antivirus and just stop using it, but that's such a politically charged thing that you couldn't possibly do so. And if we could provide evidence that taking out the AV didn't make a difference in terms of the number of compromises, then those people could deploy their budgets more effectively. And in deploying their budgets more effectively, they could have a greater impact on what's happening. And if they have a greater impact on what's happening, maybe, just maybe, we'll have a little bit less burnout. Now, one thing that people often bring up when I show this model is that attacks are unevenly distributed, or that they believe attacks are unevenly distributed. I personally don't believe that. I think it's a testable hypothesis, but it's worth dealing with, and I think the way we should deal with it in the short term is to simulate attacks, to deploy our penetration testers in ways that are designed to actually help us answer the questions about, is this control effective? If I know I have 4 organizations and 2 of them have AV and 2 don't, do the pen testers have differential success in breaking into them? And if they don't, then attackers like those pen testers are not impacted. And so we can use simulated attacks to deal with the different distributions of attacks which may exist in the real world. And I think that this is a worthwhile thing. So, we're here, we're not there. How do we get there? And more importantly, why don't we talk about what's happened to us? I said I would come back to this question. And I don't think it is simply because we have Darth Vader looming over us, and Darth Vader looming over us over in the corner there, which is hard to see because of the lights here. But yes, there is a Darth Vader in the corner looming. But anyway, there are many reasons that organizations don't talk about what's happened to them. And many of these reasons are really well understood. We've been beating a little bit of a dead horse over them. But things like your stock price will collapse or your customers will flee are well known. We all know that these things happen, except they actually don't. Except they actually don't. What really happens, and stock price has been studied first, the impact of a breach disclosure on stock price was first studied by Acquisiti and Talang in 2006, and what they found is that most organizations see a 2 to 3% hit in their stock price, which statistically disappears in 2 to 3 days. Now, I'm not saying that a 2 to 3% hit in your stock price is a good thing or a desirable thing, but I am saying that it does not line up with the fear that prevents us from talking about these things. One thing that people sometimes bring up when I mention stock price is but choice point or but some other outlier, which is a statistical abnormality. If you'd like to see what happens to a company like TJX, Gunnar Peterson has been blogging about this on his One Raindrop blog. And the answer is TJX, after the biggest, at the time, biggest breach in history, a title which doesn't seem to last very long. But at the time, the biggest breach in history, and it turns out that in the several quarters after the biggest breach in history, their stock price shot up. It shot up, which means that your customers probably aren't really fleeing. There's a belief, and if you call people on the phone and ask them, what would you do if an organization you were doing business with lost your credit card number, lost your social security number, lost your medical records? 80–90% of them will say, in survey after survey, they will say that they will stop doing business with that organization. But it turns out to be a little difficult to stop doing business with your alma mater. It turns out to be a little difficult to stop doing business with your local government. It turns out to be a little difficult to stop doing business with your health insurer, although that is getting easier. But it also turns out that moving accounts around is challenging, that TJ Maxx has a value proposition that people find attractive, and so they keep going there. And when you ask not the consumers or the citizens, but you ask the people who work at these organizations what happened after you told people about this, abnormal customer churn is generally on the order of 3 to 5%, which again is not something that I would embrace or look forward to, but it is definitely not the 80 to 90% which you will hear people using in their marketing literature, because that's what people tell them that they will do. There's also the question of, will I get sued? And the answer, according to Sasha Romanowski, is that about 1 in 7 breaches leads to a federal lawsuit. Most of those are dismissed before the discovery phase because of the difficulty in articulating harm. And there are things you can do, like providing credit monitoring, which have a statistically significant, substantially significant impact on the likelihood that you'll be sued. And so these things that we believe will happen, as it turns out, when we study them, when we have a data set, thanks to folks like the Data Loss DB and the Privacy Rights Clearinghouse who maintain these lists of what's happened, that enables people to study what happened, and it turns out that many of our fears are unfounded. There might be fears that I haven't mentioned, and if there are, I would encourage you to go study them. You will get a good talk out of them at some nice conference if you go and actually do this statistical analysis, and it is a worthwhile thing to do. But fundamentally, I believe that each of these issues can be overcome, but I think there's another reason that we don't like to talk about these things. I think there's another reason, and this is not a comfortable reason, but I think it needs to be brought up and talked about, and that is you. That's right. I think many of the people in this room, with all due respect, are part of the problem. You're part of the problem because you don't talk about what's happened. You take these issues and you sweep them under the rug. And when I wrote this slide, I wanted to say we, because I've been party to this myself on occasion. But a few years ago, I started publishing the things that I was involved in, that I had the ability to publish. And I'll tell you honestly, every time I went to hit publish on one of those blog posts, I had butterflies in my stomach, and I had fear, and I didn't sleep well the night before I published it. It's scary. I feel that fear. I understand and I sympathize. But what I have discovered in doing this, in talking about what's gone wrong, and why it's gone wrong, is that the things I expected to happen didn't happen. I'm admitting to multiple security issues with sites that I am personally responsible for, and I'm still here at the front of the room at BSides. It has not hurt my career to be able to talk, to be willing to talk about these things. It's scary. It gets a little less scary over time. And so I'm going to say that you are probably afraid and that you don't have to be. And there's another variant of that, which is maybe you're not afraid. Maybe you believe this. Maybe you think it's the right thing to do, but you let people who are afraid win. Someone else says, gosh, I don't want to talk about that. And instead of saying, no, we should really talk about that, you say, well, okay, we'll just do the minimum. We'll do what's required by law. And if it's not required by law, we won't say anything. So I think about the question in terms of who should be afraid. And when I think of who should be afraid, I think there are characteristics that make it more reasonable that you should be frightened of what's going to happen after you disclose a breach. I think about small companies whose products may not be well integrated into operations just yet. I think about young companies, companies that haven't had time to build up the depth of relationship that larger organizations should have. And I think about security companies, companies whose products are supposed to prevent a problem, which don't prevent a problem. And so when I think about all of these things, I also think about a company called Bit9. And in February of 2013, Bit9 came out and talked about an incident that, as far as I'm aware, no one forced them to talk about. They came up and said, and I'm going to come over here and read what they said, we continue to be as open as possible and share details with the security community at large in the hopes that this information will help others. And they chose to do this. And they chose to do this even though it was scary. And the person who chose to do this is a fellow named Harry Sverdlove. And when I asked him about this, Harry said, I spent as much time with the lawyers of the PR firm as I did in the war room, because their natural reaction is to say as little as possible. In the end, we didn't lose any customers or prospects. I'm going to repeat that. In the end, we didn't lose any customers or prospects. In fact, it actually increased the respect from many of our customers because they prefer to work with vendors that show transparency. And Harry is actually here in the room. Harry, would you stand up? Thank you, Harry. What you did really is an inspiration to me. The fact that you went and you fought for this when your organization didn't have to say anything is great, so thank you. I want to talk about another organization that got hacked. And that is the Onion. Yes, America's finest news source came under attack from the Syrian Electronic Army. And after they did, they had a little fun with the Syrian Electronic Army with headlines such as, "The Syrian Electronic Army has a little fun before inevitable upcoming deaths at the hands of rebels." They had more fun, claiming that this was an article from the Syrian Electronic Army. We regretted our actions as soon as we hacked into the Onion site and saw what a goddamn mess it is with all those ads. Seriously, that site is a complete disaster. So they had their fun, which is great, which is what you would expect the Onion to do. But what you might not expect the Onion to do is to publish a blog post entitled "How the Syrian Electronic Army Hacked the Onion." And they published this on their GitHub blog. And they talked about they showed examples of exactly what the phishing messages looked like. They showed examples of what the URLs looked like. They took the information that was available to them and, like Bit9, they shared it with the community in the hopes of helping people do better. The Onion. Disclosure of incidents is sometimes a duty and it's sometimes a choice. Sometimes, for consumer protection reasons, the government mandates that we talk about these incidents. Sometimes, the Syrian Electronic Army mandates that you talk about these incidents. Sometimes it's a choice. Sometimes it's something that you choose to do. What you disclose is also a matter of duties and choices. Sometimes the law imposes a floor on what it is you're going to say. It does not impose a ceiling. You have a choice about how much you're going to say. You have the choice that Harry made. You have the choice that the Onion made. You have the choices that you or your organization are going to make in the future. Talking about these incidents in detail is scary. It's hard to do. It's hard to convince people that it's the right thing. But talking about these things early can help you close the books on what's happened. Saying, here's what we know, we'll come back and tell you more in a little bit, and providing the details that help people understand the truth can be a powerful thing versus being a press target for a very long time. So, this brings me to the question of what you're going to do next. Right now, I want you all to stop and think about the burnout that you've experienced, the burnout that you felt, the burnout that you've heard from your colleagues. I want you to think about what that's like because I want you to remember those feelings. And the reason that I want you to remember those feelings is because one day you may have a choice. You might be in the midst of a breach response. You might be in a position to influence what happens. You might be in a position when the CEO or the CIO looks over at you and says, "Can we talk about this?" Your immediate response, whether it's a nod or whether it's a shake of the head, settles the issue. If you say yes, then you can have those conversations. If you show fear, the question is almost inevitably closed. And so I want you to think about the sensation of burnout. I want you to think about the lack of efficacy which you feel in your job, which you hear your colleagues talking about, which you see Jack Daniel and others doing surveys because the problem is so prevalent. And I want you to remember that feeling so that when it happens to you, when it happens to your colleagues, when you're hearing about this over a beer, I would like you to make a commitment right now. I would like you to commit to push to get this information out, to talk about the details. I would like you to decide that you will make that push. I'm not asking you, because it may not be your decision, to definitely do. All I'm asking is that you will push, you will ask your management to do the right thing, you will tell them why it's the right thing, and you will argue to the best of your ability to make it happen. So I'm going to ask those of you who are willing to make such a commitment to stand up. I'd like you to make that commitment in public, to say, yes, I'm going to do this. The next time this happens to me, the next time I see this, I'm going to push. I'm going to push. Thank you. Before you sit down, I'd like you to turn to one side, shake hands with the person next to you. I'd like you to turn to the other side and shake hands. And you're laughing? The reason I am asking you to do this is because I want this moment to be fixed in your minds. And you can have a seat, thank you. I want this moment to be fixed in your minds. I want you to remember this. I want you to remember that you made a decision about what to do when this happens. Because it is in each of our hands to go and make this better. It is within our power to make change. And what happened here, what will happen next, is a first step in that change. And I think it will be a good change and a worthwhile one. Because to the extent that there are two types of companies, I think there will be two different types of companies. There will be those who talk about the details of their incidents. There will be those who talk about the root causes, and those who don't. I think this is an important problem. And I'm glad, I am heartened to say that with your commitment, I believe that we will do better. Thank you very much. And with that, I am happy to take questions. Yes? Do we have a mic runner, or I'll just repeat the question for the video.
Things like that. How can we develop and foster a better, more open and learning environment amongst ourselves when it comes to this?
So the question is, how can we develop a better learning environment amongst ourselves? And I think the first part of my answer is being aware that our initial response to someone telling us about a problem is very telling. It's very meaningful. It's very impactful. And the second thing is a very simple question, which is, how can I help? When someone tells you about a problem, instead of saying, how did you let those people get away with that? Ask the question, how can I help? Yes?
My problem is I've actually disclosed things to other organizations in my mind. The problem is the hackers want to be. I like watching the hackers to see what they're doing next.
Yep.
And a lot of the things I was able to monitor, I can no longer monitor once the hacker
So the question is, will the hackers up their game? And I believe that the answer is yes. And I believe it is really easy to believe that when you disclosed, there was a causal chain between your disclosure and the hackers upping their game. I would challenge you to say, how do you know that those hackers changed their behavior because of what you did, versus they learned a new technique, they found out through some other channel that didn't involve you that they were being monitored because of this or that, right? How do you know that what you're doing is the issue? Oh, okay. Kim? So that is a great point, which is that if you're working at a company that has a train wreck of a response, which I believe is an incredibly common problem, disclosing that is even harder. If you want to talk about bait for a lawsuit, that's probably bait for a lawsuit. I would flip that around a little bit and say, how do we get over the problem that companies don't know how to respond? So small groups can absolutely help in that situation. I wonder about how quickly that scales and how quickly the lessons get out, because it seems to me that I've been watching train wreck forensic responses for a good 25 years now, and we're not talking about the problem in enough detail with enough honesty that I can sit in an audience, hear a talk, and say, wow, my disaster response plan looked a lot like that one, and boy, was it painful when they executed it. I'm going to go change mine. So yes, it is absolutely a painful thing when you have a train wreck of a forensics, or the logs are gone, or someone deleted the logs, re-imaging the system before forensics showed up, or you weren't logging the right things. But until we talk about those things happening to us, our ability to learn and get better is very narrowly defined, is very narrowly scoped.
So on the issue of individual burnout, one of the observations I've made is beyond the actual technical work, what's really killing IT professionals is dealing with all the politics around that work. What strategies have you found to be effective that don't involve drugs and alcohol and smoking strategies?
So what strategies for dealing with politics? The first strategy is to find a mentor out in your organization who understands how it works, who's not in security, who can give you feedback about what you're doing. Good communication skills are dependent on the organization, and this is something I've learned a lot about working at startups and working at Microsoft, is the way in which you communicate, the cadence of communication makes a big difference everywhere. Being there before there's a problem makes a difference. And lastly, a friend of mine recommended a book recently called What Got You Here Won't Get You There. And you think you know everything you need to know about the book from the title, but it actually focuses on 20 problems that this management coach regularly sees. And I don't want to point fingers, but I see a lot of these in InfoSec. Always saying no, adding too much value. And politics are a fact of organizations. You have to learn to deal with them to be effective at some level. Or you have to say, I'm going to be the technologist, and I'm going to work for a manager who can deal with that for me. So it's not the stuff we want to do, but it's the stuff we have to do.
I hear you saying the dreaded soft skills.
Yes, the dreaded soft skills. Yes. You're welcome.
I get the impression that
Yeah. So the question is, this is a talk aimed at the grassroots, not the C-level. And I have had this conversation with the C-level, and their responses are actually no different than ours. They are afraid. They are worried about stock price. They are worried about customers fleeing. They worry about these things in different ways, and the advice that comes to them tends to be, don't do this. When you walk through these things with them, some C-level people say, okay, I understand what you're saying. You've got some good examples. We're going to do this. Others say, no, I just don't see the upside in it for me. But I believe fundamentally what I've seen is the responses are the same. And I'm getting some nods from some other C-level people in the... The primary thing that causes them to respond in a negative way is this doesn't improve their products, it doesn't grow their market, and it doesn't cut their costs. And if you're an executive at a big company, fundamentally those are the three things you care about. And this doesn't line up with those. And so the question is, why do it? Part of the answer is now laws. And part of the answer, frankly, over the next few years is more and more laws which seem a little scary, like the Florida law. If we don't do this ourselves, we're going to get bad law imposed on us. And this is going to be the last question, since I'm getting the time signals over there. Yes, no pressure. Mm-hmm.
Perhaps this is a good way to create this pressure of we need the input in order to improve we as an industry. And just go to those entities that are obliged to disclose the information and create pressure on them to disclose.
Yes, so many organizations have this information. Pressing them to disclose is a great thing. Many of them also suffer pressure in the opposite direction, where corporate lobbyists will show up and say, don't disclose this. Or there have been very public comments from the SEC saying that they believe they need more and better disclosure from companies. And the clear response of the corporate lawyers is, our vaguely worded disclosures are perfectly good when we lose $1 billion to a whale trader trading without authority. Why aren't they good enough for this? And so there is pressure in the other direction, which goes back to the, does it increase my bottom line? Does it increase the top line? Does it change my cost? Does it make my product better? And if not, the company doesn't really want to do it. So I think that we need to tell our organizations, we need to tell our friends, we need to say it's time to start talking about these things, because if we do, things will get better. So put some pressure on folks. Thank you.